Hey, this is Seagrove, and today I'm here with Rukan, who is gonna talk with us through his list and the development of it. This is the list that you played at Dallas
San Jose,
and
Dallas, and San Jose.
okay, and you and were the inventor, correct?
I was the first person to play to top with Lycanroc and Muck and Zoroark at
Okay,
San Jose, but I also kind of took the card skeleton from Yokohama, the Yokohama regionals,
okay,
and then sort of just made a few changes, and that was my starting point, and the team's sort of been refining it since then.
okay. So why don't you start off by the process? Well, actually, since Dallas just ended, how many? Um, how did it do at the tournament? How many of you played it, and how did it place?
It did pretty well. I don't actually know the exact number of people in the DDG team that played the deck, but I can say that we all played the exact same 60. I know Ryan Grant and Caleb. Okay, Ryan Grant's just bubbled out of top 16. Caleb was top 16. Kid placed top four. There might have been one more person in top 38 that also played it. I don't really remember. There's a few other AM team members that didn't make top 38. And I know there's one other player that Caleb told me he played at a League Cup. I believe his Hector's something.
Okay,
I forget his last name. Anyways, he played Caleb. Caleb played our Zoroark list, and Hector played the Night March list. And
okay,
then Caleb just ran through him. He just smashed him. And then lo and behold, Hector comes to Dallas, and he basically has our exact same list with two cards changed.
okay,
And aside from that, it's like identical to what Caleb would have run against him.
okay. Is Hector the one who
So
topped?
no, he was like top 16, or like he just
Okay,
bubbled out of top 16. He
okay.
posted on Hey Fonte. I don't have it fresh in memory. I can look it up
And
if
who
you give me
and who got
just
top
a
four
moment.
with it?
Top four was Kid,
Okay,
Kidd.
cool. So you had six placements with it, five placements with it, or very close to.
Yeah, yeah.
So obviously a really strong deck. Why don't you talk to us about its inception or its uh, how do you call it, like a pilgrimage from Japan? I don't know what it's called.
Okay.
Uh,
I mean, basically, I was pretty new to the game at the time. I was completely new to Expanded.
okay,
My mindset was I have about 2 months to prepare for San Jose. I want to focus all that time on a single deck. So I want to pick a really, really strong deck. So I looked at the Japanese Yokohama regionals.
hmm,
The first place deck was a really janky toolbox deck with Ninja Boy and Shining Genesect and Rainbow Energies and Tapu Lele promo, which didn't exist and I assume was critical to making that deck work.
okay,
So obviously I couldn't run that, but the second place deck was Zoroark, Lycanroc. So I went with that. I basically made a few changes and I took it to San Jose and it took me to top 16.
yeah,
It was really, really strong deck.
okay. And then you got so many people to play for Dallas. How did it develop as in your team, and how did everyone come to the conclusion that they wanted to play it?
Okay, so before Dallas, before San Jose, I wasn't, and at San Jose, I wasn't in a pro team at the time. Caleb recruited me, and I think more or less he just really liked the deck. I didn't really need to convince him. He also played Zoroark Lycanroc, but he played like a very different list. I forget if he even ran like Muck at all, and he had like a target whistle, and
Okay,
the deck overall he had was like significantly less consistent, and he didn't so he basically swapped over, and when we spoke, I explained the merits, why I went down to exactly two versus Seeker, and all the card counts, the two Pokecoms, and
okay,
he was all in, and he just went full steam ahead testing. He did a lot of refinements. He put in a lot of work. A lot of the new techs, they're his decisions.
okay,
And then eventually we got around to like trying to convince the rest of the team. Um, we convinced Ryan. So like I think I did like one playtest session with Ryan Grant,
Hmm.
and then Caleb was always just on Ryan's back, just saying, "Play this, play this. It's the strongest deck in the format."
Yeah.
Everyone else like Ryan would say, "Oh, but like it's kind of bad against Toad Zoro and Whale Lord, and maybe I'll lose to I don't some random like
Yeah.
garbage deck." And then the response every single time would just be, "This deck has the most inherently strong power level behind it. So not only will you beat a lot of like meta decks and you'll force a lot of meta decks to tech against you, but you'll also just sweep a bunch of like trash decks just because your deck is just
Good.
so overwhelmingly strong."
Yeah. Was
Yeah, and
was
eventually Ryan Grant like he got on board. Frank he didn't want to lose to Wailord or Toad, so he went with Pod. And then it got to a point where like he just play tested Pod so much there's basically no turning back to like learn Zoro Rock.
okay.
And then Noel and Chris just did their own thing. They were not nearly as involved with the Zoro Rock testing process.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, and was the Bunnelby for Wailord?
Yes, although the argument was that you could perhaps cheese a win by milling a Zoroark deck that drew too aggressively, or you can like shuffle two DCs back into your deck with against like a Toad archetype without needing to hit Ranger, or you can shuffle like Guzma Ranger back into your deck.
Right.
Really forces them to burn a laser on the one prize that's not going to attack.
Okay. Cool. And then what was the muck for?
The Muck
Sudowoodo?
is yes, its main purpose is for Sudowoodo, but it also shuts off Marshadow. It really makes Night March's life really, really hard. It prevents your opponent from like shamaning or leleing, so it's a great way to lock in a favorable position against any deck in the meta.
Okay.
It shuts off Wobbuffet, so you can Bloody Eyes Primal Groudon and just destroy it. Every now and then you see Oranguru. It's just too good, right?
Yeah.
Because Expanded is fundamentally a meta where, with the exception of Zoroark, there's almost no stage one ability Pokemon
Okay.
because it's just such a fast format, right?
Right.
So if you Muck is like Hex, only better in most matchups with the exception of like Gardevoir.
Okay. Did you ever regret having it up, or did you ever not put it up because of the execute?
Like you wouldn't put it up against Trevenant. You wouldn't put it up against Wailord unless they had like a Hoopa. Um, but in general, like you put it up in most matchups because eventually you're gonna put yourself into a position where you're favorable, or
Okay.
like you're gonna be behind and you're gonna end your opponent and you're gonna slap on a muck on top of the N just to make sure that your opponent like if you're behind, you need to prevent an attack, and a muck and combo is a great way to do that,
Hmm.
right? Because then they'll have like that many fewer outs. They'll probably have three Lele's, so that's three fewer outs there, maybe two Shamans, fewer outs there, maybe an Oranguru.
Right.
It's about locking in your position.
Yeah. And then was the Ranger just for Toad?
Yes, yes. We figured Toad would be too prevalent not to run it. Personally, it didn't do anything for me. It also you could Ranger off an armor press against Gillespod, so that's pretty nice.
Okay. And hit
Um,
210. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but we were pretty afraid of Toad. It turned out not a single Toad Zoroark deck made top 38, so
um, are there any other pieces of the deck you wanted to mention?
Okay, so what else? The Getsus is essential because Night March is big and it's just generally good, and
And
then
Whale
lots of
Lord?
yeah, and like maybe you're up against this so if people haven't been following up with the tournament, it looks like the red card on Zoroark deck as of like right now. I don't know if the tournament's actually ended. It probably has, but last I checked, it's looking like it's going to win, and it looks like it's going to win without losing a single round that it didn't intentionally lose to like push a favorable matchup in the top eight.
Yeah.
So which is that's crazy, and like Getsus helps against that because it says, okay, you want to hex red card combo me? I'm gonna shuffle your red card into your deck, and you have to trade to get it. Okay,
Right.
otherwise you can't pull the combo off on me. So it's always good. It's just like it's good against Whale Lord. It's just too good not to run. I can't imagine ever cutting Getsus, no
Okay.
matter how the meta changes.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
Were there any other ones?
Um, I'd kind of like to talk about how the deck kind of evolved
Yeah,
because we made a lot of changes, and I'd like to just sort of go over how our team um goes about deciding those changes and optimizing the deck list because I think what we have going on is pretty good and perhaps pretty unique compared to what other
yeah,
teams or players might be doing.
definitely.
Um, so like we started with the Yokohama list, which was XY on since it's a Japanese format. So
Right.
we had to make some changes. The I would argue that the San Jose list had a few suboptimal choices, right?
So
Like
still,
okay, the Celesteela was bad. It got cut immediately. But I'm talking about like more of the subtle things.
okay.
Since I copied like the Yokohama list directly, they had like one coral or two sycamore, and I just didn't really question it. And then after San Jose, the team was like, Caleb, Brian, pretty much everyone was like, why don't we run two Colress and one sycamore? And nobody had a reason to say like no to that, so we just did it. It
Okay.
seemed like a no, pretty obvious decision.
Yeah.
The biggest gripe going into San Jose for the list was since it's a stage two Pokemon or stage two Pokemon, everyone was just on my back saying like stage twos, it's way too inconsistent. Like you'll never make this work. And the solution to that was basically we put in two Pokecoms, and that
Yeah.
really smoothed out things. But like a lot of people still wouldn't believe me, so the only way to do that was I ended up building a decklist simulator in Python.
Right.
It would shuffle up like a few thousand hands and then simulate how often would you hit turn one Bridget and how often would you be able to hit a card draw follow up after the Bridget. And before I added the two Pokecoms, the Bridget into card draw combo, you'd only hit that about 63% of the time, which is pretty bad. If you have 63% consistency, you're going to miss day two about 60% of the time
Mm-hmm.
just from brick hands alone, and then you'll probably need to shave off half of that from like your own misplays or your opponent just being really, really good or just bad
Bad
matchups,
matchups or
right?
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really bad. I added the two Pokecoms, and that boosted that from about 63% to 70%, which is good. Very few decks can push up to 70%. And like I'm saying like 63% is really bad, but that's also like still just Gardevoir levels, whereas 70% is very much top tier in terms of consistency.
Okay.
So that's what I did for San Jose, and then going on from there, we made one other subtle tech like San Jose. All my playtesting was on PTCGO, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I just rolled over a bunch of Darkrai, some Night Marches, and then I just prepared myself mentally to deal with like Gardevoir, Sableye, and uh, Garbodor Toolbox.
What did that
Right.
process look like? Preparing yourself mentally to beat those.
I wasn't part of a team, so I didn't have resources to test. Um, and almost nobody on PTCGO was playing it, so a lot of it was like I shuffled up. I had a Gardevoir deck, so I proxied a Gardevoir deck, and I just played myself. And
Okay.
I pushed myself to about 50-50 with the matchup. And then and then I was like, oh, last minute, I got to add a Celesteela, and that did not work out. Don't do that. Don't add text last minute.
Yeah.
And then I had like a friend, but he wasn't like pro, so I asked him to just like play Garbodor Toolbox against me and just go for this game plan. And he eventually got to like about 50-50 against me, and I just decided like, okay, that's fine. It's good enough,
Yeah.
even though I wasn't too happy with it. Sort of lucked out. A lot of the pro players are like, oh, Zorak just beats Garb, right? So let's just not play Garbodor. So
Right.
I didn't run into it. A lot of people didn't play it, so that really worked out for me. And
That's cool.
Sableye, spam gets this. It's like it's impossible to find a good Sableye opponent. So
Yeah.
you just play like you run into like 5 play tests over the course of a month on PTCGO. You just make the best with it, and you just tell yourself, always gotta gets this.
Yeah.
And that was good enough to tie against the one Sableye player, Igor Costa. So I suppose that worked out.
Yeah.
And now that I'm on a team, I have better resources to actually play test things further.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, um, you have this new, you have that thing you're talking about Python where you can do test hands and stuff, and
Yes.
you're gonna be offering a service with that. Why don't you go into that?
Okay, so like I've been doing this for some while. It's been, as far as I can tell, extremely successful because like I've been sort of punching above my weight in terms of how new I am to the game, and everyone else on my team is pretty like in on this idea of like I simulate everything. So I figure why not just like capitalize on that? If anyone wants me to run my Python services, simulation services, like to fine tune their own decks, let's say like they want to play Bulu or Greninja or whatever other list, and they want that list to be fine tuned. They want that extra 5, 6, 7% consistency. I can help them get that, and I can give them the exact numbers to back that up. So they don't need to just like trust someone online to tell them that like, oh, this list of Bulu is the best. Kika Bulu, and then this is Zaya Bulu, and now there's like a million Bulu lists. Which one's actually the most consistent? Well, I can give you an actual number for that, and
Yeah.
you other with everyone else, you just have to like trust their word. So take
So
that for what it's worth.
how can people contact you if they're interested in working out a deal on that?
The best way to contact me is probably through Facebook. Um, like the simulators, they can take either a lot of work or very little work, depending on how much whether I've actually like done preliminary work on that particular deck archetype.
Right.
But I'm looking for about like $10 per deck archetype, and I'll give you a bunch of metrics on how that works and like which cards might be better and what kind of lists are more consistent.
Okay.
And then I also have we also I also have the tournament simulator, which we also do, but it's kind of a bit more experimental, and it's also like a lot more time consuming. But
Right.
you can contact me about that. I don't think I'm planning to sell that service immediately, but you can ask me a few questions about that.
Okay. And for anyone who's wondering, that's like it actually you put in matchups and such for a whole tournament, and then it plays
Yeah,
the tournament 1,000 times or 100 times or whatever,
yeah,
and
yeah.
tells you which decks are topping regularly.
We
Um,
actually, I did use that for Dallas. So there was a big argument in the team, like, do we run Bunnelby or do we not run Bunnelby? So I was like, okay, we're never gonna get anywhere arguing it because it's just completely subjective. Like, you're never gonna,
right.
there are no facts to argue over. So what I did was I took the tournament simulator. We plugged in a meta share that we thought was reasonable. I put in 25 Whale Lords, and then I split the Zoroark Lycanroc groups into two groups of 50. 50 Zoroark Lycanrocs with Bunnelby and 50 without. So before I even did this, we did some back of the napkin calculations. We said, okay, if there's 25 Whale Lords, then on average, one in five Zoroark Lycanroc players will run into a single Whale Lord, and the rest will just dodge it. So intuitively, we were like, you don't run Bunnelby. It's like a 1 in 6 chance. Don't do that. So we ran the simulation, and lo and behold, about 1 in 6 hit it, but about 50%, 1.5 times more Zoroark Lycanroc players who ran Bunnelby made it to day 8 in spite of it.
Top
And like the
eight
only
or day
change
two?
was like, yeah. So the difference the Bunnelby made was in the matchup spreadsheet, Zoroark Lycanroc with Bunnelby would have like a 90% win rate against Wailord and like a 20% win rate without it.
Right.
And aside from that, the Bunnelby list, it had a flat 3% lower win rate against everything else in the meta because we figured one less card should reduce your deck's consistency about 3%. So you should lose about 3% more games just by having one extra dead card.
Okay. Even against Toad, did you change it?
Yeah, even against Toe, like it's okay, but it's not like it's not great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it still did
So
better.
yeah, so it was like 1.5 times, and then I sort of questioned that because like in my mind, it's still a 1 in 6 chance. How does a 1 in 6 chance translate to a 1.5 times multiplier? And eventually, like we had a lot of arguing. Eventually, Caleb and Ryan just convinced me and the rest of the team just play Bunnelby, and it really worked out. Like Ryan ran into a Wailord and he won. Caleb ran into a Wailord, he won. Caleb milled someone for game, so that got him two auto wins. That Bunnelby. About half the team ran into Wailord, so it wasn't a 1 in 6. In my simulation, I assumed that Galissapod Zoroark was favored against Wailord, but as it turns out, like Frank Perchik, he played Zoroark Pod and he lost 2-0 to Wailord. So I guess
Okay.
the Wailords did a lot better than I plugged into them in the matchup spreadsheet.
Okay.
I really underestimated them, so it wasn't a 1 in 6. It was closer to a 1 in 2 because the Wailord players were good and they were doing well, and then Bunnelby just turned out to be a fantastic tech all
Awesome.
around. Yep.
Okay, so we've talked about the growth of the list. We've talked about how your team did. We've talked about how you guys have been testing using Python as well. Is there anything else that you want to hit on before we end?
I'd like to go over like the exact numbers over like how we made the decisions
Okay.
because there's a lot of subtle things that happened. I got something pulled up. So the San Jose list, it has about a 22% chance to hit hard Bridget, a 76% chance to hit Bridget at all, and a 70% chance to hit Bridget and have card draw to follow it up. So that's our starting point. We want to improve upon that.
Okay.
So the first thing was, okay, Hexlock wasn't really a consideration going into uh, San Jose because a lot of the players, they weren't as prepared for the Zoroark matchup, so they weren't hex spamming.
Okay.
Now we're expecting people to hex you, just starting from turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. Just try to lock Zoroark out of doing anything. So hard Bridget becomes more valuable. So we thought to ourselves, okay, what happens if we cut one of the Tapu Leles and we add a third Bridget? How does that change the numbers? As it turns out, it increases your hard Bridget chance from about 22% to 30%.
Yeah.
So that's 1.5 times more. That's 8% more. That's huge. And the turn 1 Bridget chance actually goes up because if you get a Lele, you don't necessarily get a Bridget, right? You might start Lele and you have no other basics. So the turn 1 Bridget chance actually went up by like a fifth of a percent. And the turn 1 Bridget into draw percentage, it went down like a tenth of a percent. So it was actually not very noticeable.
Right.
And on top of that, my simulator doesn't account for stuff like Sudowoodo, which can like fill your bench and prevent you from like
Yeah.
drawing more. So we argued in a meta with Sudowoodo, you lose 10% chance of hard drawing any option for card draw to follow up your Bridget. But once you factor in stuff like Sudowoodo, it's actually even better.
Yeah. A
So
tenth of a
that's how,
percent, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So we figured, okay, we're happy to cut the extra basic Pokemon because we have Rescue Stretcher if we run out of basics, and otherwise, 2-3 Lele, based on the simulation, just seems strictly mathematically better than 3 Lele, 2 Bridget, even though like intuitively anyone would look at it and say like, don't you want 3 Lele, 3 Lele? Lele just seems more versatile. But based on the simulations, the numbers just don't work out, and 3 Lele, 3 Bridget, 2 Lele is just better.
Okay. It do, did you ever have problems hitting damage because of not being able to fill your bench without another Lele?
Mm, that was the gut reaction of a few members of my team, and I told them, you only play tested like 5 rounds after I told you to switch. You might just be suffering confirmation bias.
Right.
That's something that I can test later in a simulator. But I would imagine no, because you're going from like 15 basics to 14.
Right.
That can't be noticeable. There's no way. It's just,
Rarely, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So next up is like we also considered the Lonzo archetype because everyone's like their gut reaction is they see Zoroark Lycanroc and they're saying like, oh, 3 stage 2s and no execute, no battle compressor. You have to be less consistent than Lonzo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought to myself, okay, I need to see if this is actually true with my own eyes. So I plugged Lonzo into our simulator. It had with 2 Bridget, 3 Lele, it had about 30% hard Bridget chance. If you switched it to 3 Bridget, it had 40%, which is really good.
Yeah.
You should be running 3 Bridget in these Zoroark decks. But since Bodhi Tracy's list, it only ran 3 hard card draw supporters. I had 2 Colress, 1 N. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah. So the simulation was it had 63% turn 1 Bridget chance, compared to 60. It had 73% turn 1 Bridget chance compared to 76% from our Zoroark Lycanroc list. So it hit turn 1 Bridget less consistently just because it doesn't have the 2 Pokecoms.
Okay.
But since it only runs 2 Colress and 1 N, and the only other way to like get a supporter is either getting Lele or battle compressoring and having a Versus Seeker in hand,
Right.
turns out its turn one Bridget into card draw chances were like 63%, 60, or it was like 65%. It was 65%, it wasn't 63%.
Okay.
So it was a solid 5% less consistent than our Zorak Like and Rock list. So at that point, I basically told my team these numbers and told them if anyone like in the meta community, doesn't matter how pro they are, if they tell you that our list is less consistent because we run 3 stage 2s, they're just wrong.
Yeah.
So that's why like basically we were considering, do we swap the 2 Pokecoms for a battle compressor for Versus Seeker engine? Well, it's not more consistent. You're trading 5% consistency to have the extra juice of 2 Versus Seekers.
Yeah.
And since Zorak Lycanroc is such a fast deck, and we just decided we don't need it. We're just gonna
And you have
win before we.
puzzles.
Yeah, you have puzzles. You're gonna win before you run out of resources, or you're gonna lose.
Okay.
And like the reasoning was, if you play turn one Bridget, next turn you're not gonna have a draw supporter in the discard most likely. So you're not gonna play a Versus Seeker turn one. You're not
Right.
gonna play a Versus Seeker turn two, and you only maybe play Versus Seekers turn 3 and 4. And turn 5, the game should be decided, right? So that's why we opted for the 2 list, and we just a third Versus Seeker was not even a consideration at any point.
Okay. Did you ever consider dropping Muck because of it being 3 stage 1s, or did you just decide?
No,
Okay.
no. Like without Muck, you just auto lose to Gliscopod, and your Night March matchup becomes unfavorable. That's too much to lose. That's just
Why do you
unacceptable.
why do you auto lose to Gliscopod?
They just pseudo Wudo you, and they have Rescue, Stretcher, and Puzzle, so
Okay. You can't
you'll
one
never,
shot.
yeah, you'll
Okay.
never one shot.
All right. What other things do you want to talk about? What other accounts?
That's about it. Other than that, I guess I'll shout out like thanks to DDD team for supporting me and helping me with all this playtesting and doing so well with the deck at Dallas. And if anyone wants to get their deck lists optimized, or if they just want to know what the exact numbers are and they just want me to just run some metrics, contact me on Facebook. I am looking for about a rate of roughly, let's say, $10 per deck archetype, which is honestly a really good deal because it could potentially take me like an hour to get the simulator running the first time around
Yeah.
and bug testing it. But the idea is like if I get multiple people asking about the same deck list, then that $10 will end up being a bit better. So I'm just gonna try this out, see how it goes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and good luck with with that and with your future tournaments and going for your invite.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.